Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme. The Israeli bombardment results in the deaths of more than 550 people in Lebanon, amongst them 50 children. As Lebanon suffers its deadliest 24 hours in 2 decades, world leaders at the UN General Assembly sound the alarm over fears of a wider war. The UN says that tens of thousands of people across Lebanon have been forced to flee their homes, and the numbers continue to grow. And Israel's closest ally, the United States, urges against a ground invasion, warning of an escalatory spiral of violence in the region. Welcome to today's edition of GNT, dedicated entirely to events in Lebanon, where more than 550 people are known to have been killed as a result of Israeli bombardment during the past day and a half. The Lebanese Health Ministry says that amongst the dead were 50 children and 94 women. Well, close to 2,000 people have been injured, and amongst the dead and the injured are emergency workers, firefighters and medics. Well, today an Israeli airstrike targeted Beirut's southern suburb of Ghobeiri. At least 6 people are known to have been killed there. Well, as the Lebanese people take shelter where they can find it, and hospitals struggle to cope under the immense pressure of these attacks and last week's attacks as well, thousands of kilometers away, the UN General Assembly is underway in New York. Okay, well, let's get more now. We can cross to Salah Hijazi, a journalist at Lour, who joins us now from Beirut. Salah, great to speak to you again. A second day of Israeli bombardment there in Lebanon. Just give us a sense of what the scale of the damage has been so far.
Indeed, this is an unprecedented wave of escalation that we are witnessing here in Lebanon. We've had around 500 people killed in just 24 hours, which is in many ways unprecedented. Many of these people were civilians. We have as well a massive wave of displacement. People coming from the south or from the Bekaa to Beirut. Which triggers also a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to the education system and to the school here that has just started. But now we have many schools, private and public schools, being flooded with the displaced people, and where there's absolutely no way to resume the school year right now. We've also had a massive destruction of several villages in the south and in the Bekaa, with some villages being struck more tens and tens of times in just the span of one single day.
Yeah, I mean, you say schools closed, being used as shelters for displaced people. I mean, when you compare life today, Tuesday, to life last week, let's say Thursday, Friday, is it a total case of night and day, in that last week life was presumably fairly normal? Now there is no semblance of normal life there in Lebanon. Is that a correct reading of the situation?
That is definitely correct. It seems like things went out of control extremely fast. No one was expecting things to go that way. Even yesterday in the morning, everything seemed more or less normal. But then suddenly you find yourself in a war zone. What was really what was really happening just in the south is now happening across the country. We've had bombardments reaching even areas such as Daou or Kasserine, which were by all means spared from the conflict since October 7th.
And I just wanted to ask you, Salah, about the health system there in Lebanon, given that the hospitals were already under enormous pressure, treating some 3,000 people who were injured last week in those pager and walkie-talkie attacks. How is the system coping? How are the hospitals coping?
Hospitals are coping in a very difficult way with what's going on, especially that their supply chains are also threatened by the bombardments. People are rushing towards, for example, fuel or even bread, even medicine. This is a really unprecedented crisis in many ways. The number of people, of injured people, is enormous. enormous. We've seen more than 1,000 people being injured yesterday, which, as you said, adds up to an already massive number of injured people after the pagers and the talkie-walkies attacks. So yeah, it seems that the health sector is really in a very risky situation right now, and we might have hospitals flooded very, very soon if the attacks continue that way. Some military analysts are arguing that this is one of the goals of the Israeli escalation to saturate the health system, which would make it much easier for Israel to conduct an even larger operation and more against Hezbollah.
Sure, and we hear, as you've been saying as well, about this enormous exodus of people from one part of the country to another part of the country. We've heard the Israeli Prime Minister telling people, get to a safe place so you're out of harm's way. What is a safe place? Which areas of Lebanon are perceived as being safer than the places from which these people who are fleeing are actually coming from?
You know, many people have fled to the southern suburb of Beirut, but the southern suburb of Beirut has been struck twice since yesterday. So it seems like less and less places are considered safe now. Many people are going to the city itself, not its suburb, which for now has not been struck. But we really cannot be sure that this is not going to happen, because Israel is indeed widening the scope of its attacks and attacking areas it has never attacked before. So yeah, it seems like there's no sense of safety anywhere anymore. But of course, places like Beirut for now are safer than the south.
Yeah, and even Beirut. I mean, in the last couple of hours, we've been receiving reports of fresh strikes in the suburbs. At least one of the strikes was deadly, killing 6 people, we gather, in the southern suburbs of Beirut. So clearly,
yes.
Even the capital, Beirut, is an extremely dangerous place to be. But does that apply to the entirety of the capital, or just particularly the south?
Probably the south more than other areas, but in other areas such as Hamra, which is one of the economic power centers of Beirut, people are receiving phone calls from Israeli numbers telling them you should evacuate. This is a dangerous area you are in. Even some ministries in Hamra have received such warnings. So it really seems that the sense of safety is a fragile one.
Hezbollah is, according to Israel, hiding weapons amongst the civilians. Israel says Hezbollah is using the Lebanese people as human shields. What do Lebanese people make of those charges?
It seems like the more Israel escalates its attacks, the more there is some kind of national unity around the victim, especially civilian ones. We've noticed that Hezbollah's political adversaries are putting politics on hold. So far, no one in Lebanon is accusing Hezbollah of using the Lebanese people as human shields. However, some are blaming it for participating in the conflict on October 7th. Others are saying it should have applied 1701. But the Israeli accusations are not well received here. No, the people are not sensing that. Are sensing that what Israel is trying to do is displace as many people as possible in order to pressure Hezbollah, not because it wants to protect the Lebanese civilian population and keep it out of harm's way.
Sure, and I think from what we've been hearing these last few days, there's a great sense of shock in Lebanon about what's happened during the course of the last week. A great sense of sadness, of course, people seeing horrific images on their screens and firsthand. There's also presumably a sense of anger, and I'd like to know where you think at this stage that anger is directed. Is there anger directed at the political class for not having done more to avert this? Is the anger directed at Hezbollah for having, as you were just saying there, somehow started this by dragging Lebanon into the war with Israel on its southern border? Where is that anger directed?
It's directed towards Israel, towards the international community, towards Hezbollah, and even towards the government, which is accused of not doing enough to protect the civilian population, or or not working enough on the international with the international community to prevent a major escalation. People are angry against a wide spectrum of actors and individuals, but it does seem that a lot of anger is directed towards Israel.
And in terms of how people are coping, I mean, part of the great sense of anxiety must be for ordinary middle-class Lebanese families that have already suffered years of economic strife. These last 4 or 5 years, the middle class has shrunk and people have been driven into poverty. They must be wondering how on earth they're going to make ends meet during a prolonged period of uncertainty. Is that something you're hearing a lot about?
Definitely. Just this morning, I was visiting someone I know in a restaurant, and that person was telling me she just opened her restaurant, and she was telling me we just can't take it. We can't take another war financially, morally. On a human scale, it's just impossible, and there is a great sense of anxiety, of fear for the future, of fear for one's life, even because. As you said, the strikes are becoming more and more spread across the territory. The middle class in Lebanon particularly feels vulnerable right now in many aspects. We've seen people waiting in front of bakeries to get bread, to secure bread in case of a major escalation. Same goes for fuel, for gas.
Sure, and just lastly, Salah, some people are comparing Lebanon to Gaza, saying Lebanon looks like it's going to become the next Gaza, and that must fill people with fear, given that Gaza has been destroyed to the extent that it has been. Who are people looking towards to make sure that doesn't happen? Are they looking at the country's politicians? Are they looking at the wider world? Who would the Lebanese people invest their hope in terms of making sure that what happened to Gaza does not happen to Lebanon?
Definitely the international community. The French envoy to Lebanon, Jean-Yves Le Drian, is in Lebanon right now, discussing with various political actors means of de-escalation. But and the Prime Minister Najib Mikati is going to New York to take part of the UN General Assembly, and this is where a lot of people are looking. This is what a lot of people are looking towards, because it's being said that there's going to be intense diplomatic contact on the sidelines of the General Assembly.
Okay,
and people are, and the main hope of most people here is the position of the United States.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us once again. Salah Hijazi, journalist from Orient Le Jour. Thank you. Well, let's get more reaction from Lebanon itself, and we can cross to Beirut and speak to the Lebanese MP Mark Daou. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Hezbollah has launched around 100 projectiles towards Israel just today. Israel's argument, from talking to our guests, seems to be that if Hezbollah didn't do things like this and didn't fire, as it has done for the last 12 months, projectiles into their territory, Lebanon wouldn't be in the situation it finds itself in now. How do you respond to that?
I think over the past 10 months, it has been proven that multiple times, the multiple folds have been the Israeli attacks versus Hezbollah attacks at the ratio close to 5-1. And what we saw yesterday with hundreds of air raids on Lebanon. Of course, Lebanon has no air force, barely retaliates. So I think whatever Hezbollah is doing doesn't even measure up to a military response of equal measure. I think what the Israelis are currently doing are they're escalating violently and crossing all limits in terms of war crimes, random strikes against citizens. I've realized Hezbollah initiated the altercations across the border, but what happened yesterday goes way beyond anything that we've seen in the past 11 months.
But this is, isn't it, once again, a case of Hezbollah dragging Lebanon into a situation that the Lebanese people did not ask to be dragged into?
It is exactly the case. Hezbollah has unilaterally launched military operations. That has never been discussed in parliament. There is no government decision to escalate, our unity with the Palestinians and in solidarity against the genocide they're undergoing does not mean we sacrifice our own country. That has been Hezbollah's decision. What is happening right now is caused by Israeli excessive attacks on Lebanon or across. Hundreds of thousands of people are being mass punished. The entire country is at risk. Our government is faltering because their resources are extremely limited. We barely have enough sheets and mattresses and food for the hundreds of thousands who have flooded to the region I represent and other places in Lebanon that overnight just received tens of thousands of people in public schools. Schools are shut. People are in those schools now. They barely got away with whatever they could. The government is not capable of providing the support needed to function. We're literally buying stuff so people can sleep and eat in those schools today.
So you have got, in fact, a direct hand in the support of internally displaced people there in Lebanon. I mean, do tell us a bit more about that and how it's really landed on you and your region to have to host a large influx of people.
Our region is the closest to the south that has been bombed. It's the southern Mount Lebanon region, Alay, the Shuf, this region. Plus, it's right next to the southern suburb of Dahi, which is a stronghold of Hezbollah with a population of 700 to 800,000 people. All those people from the south, from Dahi and others, have been renting apartments and moving into homes all across Mount Lebanon within this district, even going all the way to the furthest north of the country. The Biqa, the eastern side, is being bombed as well. So the entire population is now squeezed into Mount Lebanon and parts of the north. Our region is the closest. Therefore, it's the first point to stop. And when people get displaced, they don't move to the furthest point. They just move to the next point, which is safe, so they can still commute to check on their homes, their houses, their work, or anything that they need to save as soon as there is a ceasefire or some calmness. And yet I still need to inform that people are still in the south, in the villages that got bombed intensely yesterday and with intense overflights today. So the risks to humanitarian lives is very, very high. We had 600 people die yesterday in one hit, as much as have died in the past 11 months, just in one day, as much as 11 months. So the current situation is dire. The government has failed so far, not to mention Hezbollah has absolutely no measures, no preparation, and no supplies to provide those who have left. There wasn't even an evacuation plan. Football stadiums or collection points have not been established. People directly started going to villages asking where the public schools are, or asking for apartments to rent, or literally just stayed over with their relatives or their friends in safer areas. You've got 4 or 5 families in 100 square meter, 200 square meter house just to spend a few nights until they find better arrangements. And so far, the schools in the public schools in the region that were opened yesterday, in my region, there was about 15. Today, we've doubled in number because it wasn't enough, and we're still looking for more. And those schools are not equipped with kitchens, hot water, heating. Everything needs to be received. We have people in cars going and buying stuff from supermarkets and from wholesalers. So the minimum decency of people can go to the toilet, they can sleep, and they can basically make sure that their families are safe for this period of attacks.
So what we keep hearing from Israel, which is our war is not with Lebanon, it's with Hezbollah. It sounds like a lot of people around you would entirely disagree with that statement. And they'll say it is absolutely a war with us because look at the suffering that we're enduring.
Yes, of course. If you look at the dynamics, the real dynamics of what's happening, if a part of Lebanon is bombed, the entire economy pays. People are moved, then displaced, then we will have to take them in. Those are citizens of our state. I'm an MP representing Lebanon. I do not represent a part of Lebanon. we need to be responsible towards each other. And what the Israelis are basically doing is basically just undermining the entire processes of normal life in Lebanon. The airport is only the Lebanese airline is still functioning. Everyone else has canceled all their flights. There are people stuck in the country. We have one airport in Lebanon. I've already demanded that the government open a second airport in the north, which is of utmost necessity for humanitarian supplies and others. We can't risk everything on one airport in Dahi next to Beirut. So there are things which should have been done by the government that haven't been done. And the punishment that the Israelis are exercising on the Lebanese is affecting all the Lebanese. These are not surgical strikes. These are not assassinations or direct attacks. This is mass migration and transfer of people from multiple regions into one region. We've seen that in Gaza through tents and people moving around. Now, Lebanon still has better resources, but nevertheless, this is the same strategy, and people are terrified in Lebanon of further escalation. And so far, the main supporters of Hezbollah, which is Iran, has been mute and promoting peace and dialogue in New York, completely cutting off their allies in Lebanon, who have only the Lebanese state and the Lebanese people to take care of all the Lebanese who have been in the south and other places. Today, Lebanon is left on its own. It needs support, and it needs direct humanitarian intervention as well as diplomatic immediate solution and a ceasefire that Hezbollah and Israel both need to commit to, so we protect the Lebanese.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Lebanon doesn't have a functioning government and an economy that has been through incredible turmoil in the last 4 or 5 years, and a former central bank chief who's now in custody. I mean, these are all factors, aren't they, that have meant that Lebanon wasn't properly represented at the negotiating tables in the corridors of power around the world to avert precisely a crisis like this one.
Exactly. We don't have a president and have been without a president of the state, which is the head of the executive branch of the state, for the past year and a half, because Hezbollah and the Amal movement and their allies have been boycotting electoral sessions for the presidency. 2, we have a caretaker government, which is boycotted by 1/3 of its members because of political feuds, and therefore it barely meets to get the bare necessities done. 3rd, we have a big financial crisis, and most recently, the previous the governor of the central bank has been in jail for the past 2 weeks. So basically, we are in the worst possible crisis. And on top of that, we get dragged into a war that we do not want, that will achieve nothing for Lebanon, that is only a regional negotiation between forceful powers competing, which are Iran and Israel. And we are paying the price now. And I think at this point, the only solution is that the Lebanese state needs to take charge, which means the government and the current parliament need to immediately meet. We need to elect a president as soon as possible and stop the Hezbollah veto. And we need to get things in shape so we have proper representation, so the international community will have a fully legitimate government and president to talk to find solutions. Every solution in Lebanon is signed by the president because he represents the state, he or she. Therefore, we need that president to happen. The solution starts with internal unity in parliament and an election, followed by us taking proper diplomatic action, stopping the war, putting Hezbollah in place, and making sure we have a big alliance of Arab states and others supporting us to push off Israeli aggression against us.
I mean, Israel would presumably like nothing more than to see Hezbollah completely isolated by the Lebanese people. They would like to hear people turning their backs on Hezbollah, denouncing Hezbollah very publicly, saying, not my war, not in my name, those sorts of things. That's not happening, is it? But do you think we could reach a point where that does happen?
It's impossible. Every time the Israelis tried that strategy in 1993, 1996, 2006, every war they thought they can put a wedge between those who are Lebanese and others. That never worked, and it will never work. The attacks are impacting all of Lebanon. We all feel we are victims of Israel. We've seen what Israel has done in Gaza. We will not accept to be put into that place. We can deal with Hezbollah internally. We need the state to assert itself and its legitimacy. Hezbollah needs to listen to the state, but that doesn't mean that Hezbollah and us and everyone in Lebanon are absolutely clear on national unity first and pushing out the Israelis is the main thing, because they are the biggest risk to all of Lebanon.
For people who don't know Lebanon, and I've visited your country many times, help our viewers understand how it works. You've got Hezbollah, a state within the state, but there's obviously also an army in Lebanon. What's the Israeli army doing at this particular moment? What's their role and what can they do?
I think what the Israelis have currently been doing is attacking Hezbollah's critical infrastructure. They've hit through the pagers operation that exploded thousands of pagers across Lebanon, especially within Hezbollah-controlled areas that were carried by Hezbollah personnel. In addition, another attack, walkie-talkies, and then assassinations of Hezbollah leadership, but also now with the displacements of hundreds of thousands of Lebanese from their homes, in addition to regular overflights, breaking sound barriers, like you're living in a country with planes and rockets falling on top of you in some region everywhere, and you doubting every electronic device if it's been booby-trapped with explosives by the Israeli intelligence. This puts you in a state of war, and we all feel we're under attack. The Lebanese army maintains follows the orders of the government. Hezbollah operates completely independently from the government and the state, although they're represented in parliament and they're represented in the current government. But unfortunately, they are not coordinating with the other Lebanese, nor are they responsive to the demands of the majority of Lebanese that have been over and over polled in every survey, in every TV appearance, with the majority of members of parliament basically saying we do not want this war, and yet the military apparatus of Hezbollah continues. And that is the major problem, the fractions that we have inside because of that alignment are causing a great weakness in our response. We hope we will get a full unity between all of the Lebanese within their institutions. Hezbollah has to be part of that because they are not a counterbalance in terms of military. We get 10 strikes a day from the Israelis, and Hezbollah launches 1 or 2 rockets, and that's it. Honestly, it's not a war. This is just punishment by the Israelis against an entire population.
And to what extent would you say that Hezbollah has been weakened up until this point? Because obviously their means of communicating within the ranks with those pagers and walkie-talkie explosions that you just mentioned there will have made life more complicated in terms of communications amongst them is concerned. Obviously, they've lost a large number of fighters, those who are in hospital being treated from the injuries of last week's explosions, the fighters they've lost on the battlefield. Do you get the impression that Hezbollah has been severely degraded? And do you see Israel calculating that they'll get to a certain point where they'll feel that they've done what they set out to do, which is to weaken Hezbollah and therefore reduce the threat?
I'm not a military expert to know if Hezbollah is still militarily functional and capable of striking Israel. They have been launching attacks on a daily basis against Israel. To what extent their capabilities are or they've been degraded, I'm not sure, but I can tell you this. Hezbollah's claim of to achieve victory and their ability to deter Israeli attacks and their claim of being able to protect Lebanon and the population have all been destroyed. Those claims are false. What is happening today is, unfortunately, we saw that in Gaza as well. We're terrified of the Israeli overconfidence because of the successes that they've had in fighting Hezbollah over the past week or 10 days. They will be overconfident. Hezbollah will feel they have to overcompensate, and the result might be further destruction in Lebanon. I think that is the worst thing that can happen to us now. And the results, we've seen that in Gaza. Hamas will always, and the Palestinians will always defend their land, and the Israelis will continue to achieve unachievable goals. And I think in Lebanon, the goal of securing the 10-kilometer border, the application of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 can only be achieved through diplomatic means. I think all of this military attacks, even weakening Hezbollah and others, is not as permanent, not a solution, except if we get to a political solution. And I think that is what is more useful, and the international community and the US government in specific are key players in achieving that operation. And I think they really need to put some serious effort into stopping this war immediately. I know for a fact the Lebanese government and me as a member of parliament, we are ready to definitely apply 1701 and achieve a ceasefire. And there should be negotiations happening through interlocutors to resolve this escalation, because it will not lead anywhere.
So just lastly, Mark, if you had a message to the international community with regards to the situation in your country, what would that message be?
There is still time to resolve this problem without force. I think the level and intensity of what we've seen between the Israelis and Hezbollah has determined this strategic balance of power between the two. And I think on that basis, we should stop the killing, go into a negotiation. The Lebanese have to unite to have a stronger negotiating position behind their state with a clear plan of United Nations Security Council 1701. So my call to the international community is, Lebanon has been a country that is committed to international law. Us being destroyed will help no one. On the contrary, we have 2 million Syrian refugees, 400,000 Palestinian refugees. This is a country serving every issue in the Middle East, and it's a country that can help stabilize the Middle East. So stabilizing Lebanon instead of destroying it and weakening the state will only leave Hezbollah and the Israelis fighting over the shatters of a government and a state that can be a big support for regional stability.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Lebanese MP Mark Daou in Beirut, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Let's get an update from Tel Aviv now, and we can cross to our correspondent there, Sarah Coates. Sarah, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Israel says that more rockets were fired into Israeli territory today from Lebanon. What more can you tell us about that?
Certainly, the Iron Dome missile defence system has been working overtime, especially in the last few hours. Many rockets launched over that border into these largely evacuated northern communities, but also deeper inside to Israeli territory. Now, a number of these have made interceptions, a number also landing in open areas. And this massive barrage of rockets came shortly after the Israeli military conducted yet another targeted strike. That is its words for it, another targeted strike on a southern Beirut suburb. And we do understand, according to security sources on the ground in Lebanon, that this was targeting and has killed the commander of Hezbollah's missile unit. So certainly another major escalation, but we are yet to hear from Hezbollah itself.
When people there in Israel read about the sorts of levels of casualties that are being experienced there in Lebanon, more than 500 people killed in the last day, what do people say about that? Do people say this is justified and that Israel is simply defending itself?
There is certainly mixed opinion. There are, of course, Israelis who do want to see the situation drastically changed, do want to see a ground incursion into Lebanon, and do believe that this is the right way of doing things. And really, over the course of the last weeks, we have seen opinion polls shift more favourably with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's gained a few seats in the last few months after really slipping after October 7. He still hasn't come out to claim any kind of responsibility for that attack on southern Israel almost 1 year ago now, and that really saw his popularity fall very drastically. But certainly when I've spoken to Israelis in these northern parts over the past few months, they have been telling me that they do want to see the security situation changed, but not at the expense of Lebanese people. And this is really the sense I've been getting. These people up in the north, many of them have actually said to me, we don't want to have any dramas, basically, with the people of Lebanon. This is with Hezbollah, and this is what was echoed, really, with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu over the last day or so. He came out to make that video address that was apparently directed at the Lebanese people. He said in English, this war is not with you, this war is with Hezbollah. So certainly, once again, mixed opinion here on the ground. People who do think this is the right thing to do and people who are totally against it.
And is there a sense of nervousness there in Israel now that the violence has escalated to the point that it has done on this next front, i.e. on Israel's northern border?
There is, of course, a lot of concern over this escalating further, especially given that Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, and there is this fear that Iran may be dragged into this conflict and it could, in fact, spiral into a wider regional war, which would have catastrophic repercussions. But of course, you know, this is a country where everybody basically needs to serve in the military if they were born here, if they've got Israeli citizenship. So people really have very close links to the military here. But certainly there is a lot of concern, especially in these largely evacuated northern areas. When I speak about largely evacuated, it can be very difficult to kind of grasp, because while most of these areas are largely evacuated, you might have communities basically next to each other that are just a few hundred metres apart, but one of them might be sitting outside this 5-kilometre zone that is set up by the Israeli government. So while many places are evacuated, a place that's pretty close may actually not be evacuated. And when you think about it, the government is paying for all of these people to be housed in these hotels in the central parts of the country and other parts of Israel, while their neighbours are forced to stay and endure this rocket fire. So, of course, it is very difficult for many, many people who do remain up there. They're basically facing very, very tough conditions. Schools are closed, most services are shut down, and they've been telling me they've been left to their own devices.
OK, let's just turn our attention to what's happening in Gaza at the moment, just before we finish. At least 6 people, amongst them 3 women, reported to have been killed in an Israeli strike on the Nusayrat refugee camp. Can you just tell us a bit more about what's been happening in Gaza during the last day or so?
Certainly, these airstrikes do continue, and what we have been hearing from the Israeli government is that it's potentially weighing a plan to conduct some sort of a siege on the northern part of the Strip, basically to suspend all humanitarian efforts. What would essentially bring out these Hezbollah fighters that have returned to the north. And if you go on what we've been hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu and other security and defence officials over the course of the last few months, this was one of the reasons that Israel had a lot of problems with some of these ceasefire and hostage pacts, these deals, is that it would allow these displaced northern Gazans to return home without security checks. And that is something that the Israeli government said simply cannot happen, because it would then allow Hamas to regroup and rearm and begin firing into Israel. So what we are seeing, unfortunately, are these continued strikes on Gaza. And so many people have been displaced to these southern parts of the Strip. I was talking to a family just a week or so ago, and they've been moved many, many times. I was speaking to the son on the phone in his 6th camp, I'm pretty sure it was, sitting there with bullet holes behind him in a wall. He's actually in university, has been studying. He's in his 4th or 5th year of medicine and has been volunteering at a hospital there. But he said basically there's no hope left in Gaza for anyone, and for anyone to have a future, they need to leave Gaza. But in order for that to happen, the Rafah crossing needs to open.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest from Tel Aviv. Our correspondent, Sarah Coates, thank you very much. Well, let's get some more analysis. We're joined now by the former head of the research division at the Israel Defense Forces Intelligence Corps and the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser. Thank you so much for joining us. You're also a research fellow at the Jerusalem Center of Foreign and Security Affairs. You're also a fellow at the Miskov Institute. Great to have you with us. Israeli military is saying it'll do whatever is necessary to push Hezbollah away from Lebanon's border with Israel. What is your understanding of Israel's military objectives here?
Well, the military objective is to cause Hezbollah to understand that the price they are paying for refusing to allow the population of the northern communities in Israel to go back to their homes is way too much, and they would rather stop the harassment of these Israeli civilians and allow them go back to their homes. And the price they are paying is becoming higher every day that goes by, sometimes even by the hour. And they should cut their losses as soon as they can, because the more this war goes on, the prices they pay become more and more painful.
In Gaza, Israel said that the mission was to destroy Hamas. Is the same true of Hezbollah? Is that what Israel wants to do, to destroy Hezbollah, or is that not the objective here?
No, this is not the objective. That's we don't think that we are now in a war that is aiming at destroying Hezbollah. We just want to make sure that they stop shooting at us. That's all, and do it in a way that allows the people of the northern communities to go back to their villages and communities in feeling safe. And that's what we need to do in Lebanon. For accomplishing this goal, we need to decimate the capabilities of Hezbollah and to charge a heavy price from this organization, from this terror organization. And they cannot complain. Nobody asked them to intervene on October 8th, and nobody asked them to kill 12 children in the village of Majder Shams. And nobody asked them to keep the commitment to prevent the people from the communities along the border from coming back home. So if they decide to go this way, there is a price for everything. There's no free lunches.
How much weakened? You say Hezbollah has been weakened and is being weakened by the hour. To what extent would you say, and we've covered a number of setbacks faced by Hezbollah on this channel in the last week or so, but how degraded has Hezbollah become as a result of events in the last few weeks?
It's very hard to say. You know, they have so many missiles and rockets that even if we have destroyed, let's say, 50% of that, they still have something like 70,000 rockets. So it's not that we are anywhere close to depriving them from all their capabilities. But we caused a lot of damage to their command and control hierarchy. They lost many of their top commanders. They lost many operatives, hundreds of them, and including the key commanders. And they lost even today. They lost the commander of the missile unit, and they lost many weapons that we have consistently bombed during the last couple of days. We are now on a new phase that is being conducted on the ground for only a very short period of time, a couple of days. It's for the first 11 months, we were playing according to the rules set forth by Hezbollah, according to which it was a tit for tat with some controlled and very gradual escalation. Now it's a new phase that is being executed only for 1 week, and if this goes on for a couple of more weeks, then the damage done to Hezbollah's capability is going to be immense.
If Hezbollah was using pagers and walkie-talkies to communicate a week ago, and they're presumably not anymore after what happened, how are they communicating, do you think? What's your understanding of the way messages are cascading from the top downwards to the fighters?
Well, they have all kinds of communication means. The pagers were very easy to pass on rapid announcement that has to go to many customers at the same time. But they still have other capabilities to communicate, and they communicate, and you see that they're still in control of their people. The attacks are carried out on the times that they want them to be carried out. It's not the end of Hezbollah yet. They still have the ability to command and control their capabilities.
And do you believe that all of the commands come from Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, or do you think they come more likely from Tehran via Hassan Nasrallah and then down the chain of command to the fighters?
Well, the policy comes from Tehran. The specific commands, what to do exactly according to the policy coming from Tehran, is coming from Nasrallah and those few aides that are still there around him. Many of them people that he trusts less than he trusted the original team that was supporting him. But we still have work to do. It's not that we have finished the work, and we still have work to do in trying to diminish the capabilities of Hezbollah. And still, at some point, somebody would have to do something about Iran, because the policy, as I said, is coming from there. The weapons are coming from there. The training is coming from there. So Iran is deeply involved.
Trust must be a significant issue for Hassan Nasrallah at the moment, given the fact that his organization was clearly infiltrated to the extent that it was for those pagers and walkie-talkies to explode in the way they did. Do you think that's having an impact on his psychology and the way he's acting at the moment? I mean, clearly he can't trust the people around him.
I'm sure it has a very devastating impact on his state of mind. We could have seen it when he was giving this address about the pagers attack. He was definitely looking bad and sad. And he has many good reasons to be concerned because, as you said, it proves that he's totally penetrated. Since then, we saw Ibrahim Akil being killed by Israeli attack, and Karaki, yes or no, I don't know if he was killed, but he was attacked. And today, Abbasi. Every day there's something else happening, and he has many reasons to be worried about his ability to go on with the... He still can give the commands, as I said, but he's totally unsafe, and not only himself, but the entire upper echelon of Hezbollah is unsafe, and they have to bear that in mind. We try to use that in order to convey to him the message that the best thing for him to do is to stop the war and accept some arrangement that would enable the Israeli citizens of the northern area come back to their homes. But The problem is that for him to do that is to admit that he made a terrible mistake by entering the war on October 8th and by not accepting the deals presented to him by the American envoy Hochstein during those 11 months that elapsed since then. Now he's caught in a different corner that if he accepts the deal now, he's going to be looked upon as somebody who made terrible mistakes throughout this year.
Up until now, well, only a couple of days into this stage of the conflict, it's been airstrikes carried out by Israel. That's been the principal use of force demonstrated by Israel. Do you see this escalating to the extent that it becomes a ground invasion by Israel?
It's a possibility. I don't think that anybody is going to take an easy decision on that. We all understand that this is going to be another stage in this escalation. And so I don't think that we should rush into that. But if Hezbollah doesn't accept the offer to reach an agreement now, after being so heavily bombarded and paying such a heavy price, then maybe you need to go to another stage and move underground as well. That's a possibility. We are ready, from the military point of view, we are ready to that. For that, we have all the training and we accumulated the forces along the border. Everything is ready, but nobody is trigger happy on that.
More than 500 people have been killed during the course of the last 36 hours or so. A large number of them civilians, several of them children. Even last Friday, there was an airstrike on the southern suburbs of Beirut, which killed Ibrahim Akil from Hezbollah, but it also killed 54 other people, again, 7 children amongst them. Illegal according to international law. And perhaps more significantly, couldn't this be interpreted as being a rallying cry for Hezbollah as the nation rallies around them and says, indeed, our innocent people are being killed. We clearly have to pick a side here, and it's not going to be Israel.
No, just the opposite of everything you said is true. All the targets Israel is hitting are military targets. Unfortunately, Hezbollah, just like Hamas, places its weapons inside the civilian houses. It's unbelievable. You know, you have the dining room, you have the bathroom, and you have the missile room. That's how Lebanese houses look like. It's terrible, and the families live in those houses. This is unbelievable. And there's the only way to take care of them, of those missiles, is to hit them. And
even if it means killing
all these people that live in such houses know where they live.
54 innocent people. 54 innocent people die. 54 innocent people die. 54 innocent people died on Friday. We assume they're innocent. A number of them children. So that one of them.
But Ibrahim Akil held. But you know that Ibrahim Akil held this meeting in which all the leaders of the Radwan force were present in a civilian house. He did it in the basement of a civilian house. That's where this meeting was held. So in order to reach the basement, you have to go through through some parts of this house. You have to use effective ammunition. And the fact that he holds his meeting in the midst of a civilian area, in a civilian house, this is what kind of behavior is that? And you said it's illegal. It's not illegal, because according to the international law, you are allowed to take action against military targets. And if you think that the military benefit from what you're going to do by hitting military targets is justifying the unintentional damage to civilians, then it's totally legal to do that.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm being told, but we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Retired Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Meanwhile, the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says that President Joe Biden is determined to bring about a Gaza ceasefire and that he's also seeking to de-escalate tensions in Lebanon. Well, let's get more on U.S. diplomatic efforts, and we can speak to the former U.S. ambassador to Israel and Jordan, Thomas Pickering. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We heard from Jake Sullivan in the last day or so saying a path towards de-escalation can be found between Israel and Lebanon. How optimistic are you that US diplomacy is going to deliver some sort of a resolution to this conflict?
I think, Tom, with the passage of almost a year since the beginning of this conflict, there have been spurges of optimism from time to time, unfortunately unrequited. We spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and so I begin with, perhaps unfortunately, a note of some skepticism about early result, and therefore greet with enthusiasm Jake's optimism, but don't necessarily endorse it as the centerpiece of current reality. It is a very tough negotiation, a very tough time, and a very difficult situation, particularly for civilians who are under bombardment.
Yeah, absolutely. And even a shocking piece of language that I heard came from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said that Lebanon risks becoming the next Gaza. I mean, that's going to make people extremely concerned, given what's happened in Gaza. Do you think that sounds alarmist or realistic?
I think that the Secretary General is trying to make certain that the international community understands his assessment of the gravity of the situation, and I believe it is grave. It's grave first for those who are suffering horrendous damage as a result of either being in the wrong place at the wrong time or failure fully to observe the laws of warfare and their humanitarian side. That it's affected both sides, but one side's particular catastrophe does not justify in international law the wreaking of a catastrophe on the other side in return. It merits what Jake has proposed and what the U.S. has been struggling for without, unfortunately, result. That is a ceasefire, a settlement, hostage returns, and humanitarian relief for the people in the conflict now in both Gaza and Lebanon.
Yeah, but one of the big differences between Gaza and Lebanon is that Lebanon has got a well-established diplomatic service. They do have leaders with contacts around the world. There's more infrastructure, even though it's far from being perfect. Do you think that those links with the rest of the world perhaps do give Lebanon a little bit more cause for optimism in terms of putting an end to this conflict sooner rather than later?
In simplest terms, Lebanon is a member of the United Nations with, as you say, an established diplomatic service and a foreign policy. Hamas is not, but Hamas has the assistance of Qatar and Egypt, plus the interest of the United States. And I would say the interest of Israel as well, which is undergoing a situation where its actions have brought about a loss of credibility, community support, and international ratification of what it's doing. And as a result, that is a problem that can't be ignored and which cries out for a ceasefire, a settlement of the problem, engagement in a peace process, and the workings of all sides to try to achieve an acceptable solution, as challenging and as hard as it is.
We keep hearing people in Lebanon saying the country is extremely united. We stand firm in the face of hostility from across the border in Israel. But do you think that's 100% true? Because, of course, there are large sections of Lebanese society that do not like Hezbollah any more or any less than people across the border in Israel.
That was true, certainly going into the conflict a year ago. Reporting from Lebanon has begun to indicate more unity and solidarity, but I don't believe from my experience in the region over many years that that is a done deal or an established fact. But it does augur well for the notion that people are working somehow to try to end the horrendous nature of the conflict and out of it seek to bring something that can, in one way or another, be established as a peace settlement in which both sides are equally advantaged and both sides have to make equally difficult compromises. And we're not there yet, and that doesn't seem to be right over the horizon, so to speak.
So doesn't this sound like the last 12 months have been something of a rallying cry, something of a coup for Hezbollah, in the sense that they've used what's been happening in Gaza as a rallying cry to garner support from the rest of the country, from the rest of the region, in the face of Israeli hostilities, perceived hostilities in Gaza, and therefore come out of this stronger with the support of stratas of Lebanese society that they didn't have before the conflict. Doesn't that therefore mean that this is working against Israel's long-term interests and that they've got a greater, stronger, more supported Hezbollah just across the border than they had 11 months ago?
I don't agree with all your points of assessment. Anybody who brings down on Lebanon a horrendous bombardment as we had yesterday by its own actions is certainly sharing some of the blame that must go around. But I do believe that the nature of the conflict has continued to ratify the idea that Jake Sullivan talked about, that the U.S. has committed itself to try to do so far without success. But it is the established way of proceeding in these issues, which is a ceasefire and a negotiated solution to achieve a mutually acceptable result. All of that obviously is diplomatic talk at the present time, not something that is on the verge of being realized, despite the fact that the parlous nature of the current situation, including U.S. interest in avoiding another third global conflict, if we could call it that way, around the Middle East, is serious and important and very significant.
When we look at what's happened in the last few weeks, notably in particular in the last 7 days, the setbacks that Hezbollah has faced, the exploding pagers, the walkie-talkies, the deaths of senior commanders, the bombardment of their neighborhoods. Do you think, what's your assessment? How seriously weakened has Hezbollah been by these events of the last 7 or 8 days?
Undoubtedly somewhat, but I'm still married to the idea adopted by military leaders in a number of places, including the U.S. and Israel, that this is not a war which sees a glorious battlefield victory and a dictated solution by the victors that is forever going to bring eternal peace. I believe very much that military force is playing a role, but that the outcome will be political. The outcome will have political ramifications, and the outcome has to be established through a give and take, not the exertion of victory marches down somebody's main street.
And given how much is going on in the world, in particular in the United States right now, the UN General Assembly underway, we're 6 weeks away from presidential elections. I'm just wondering if this story is getting significant coverage on US networks, or whether it's being eclipsed by other events, in particular the presidential race.
I think I've been watching for the last 24 hours intensely, and the coverage is broad and widespread, and I think is there. And I do think that in some ways, the question of the American election is a complicating and very difficult factor in working out the assessments of how and in what way this process should move. Domestic politicians generally in the United States believe foreign policy does not play a significant role in their electability. Now, I think we are seeing a considerable amount of attention being paid to it, maybe not enough to bring about the kind of change that I believe we should all be pushing for, but nevertheless serious enough to be a factor in an election which is now less than 50 days away for the leaders on both sides as they contemplate how and in what way they express their policy positions and will do so over the next 40-something days.
Okay, so foreign policy is certainly not top of the list of concerns for the electorate in the United States, but it's got to be in the top 4 or 5.
Traditionally, Tom, absent. Now I think it is more pertinent and more imposed on the election than we have seen in a typical American presidential election.
That being the case, given what's happening now in the Middle East, does that favor one candidate more than the other, would you say?
I don't know. It depends upon how each handles the question. There is certainly a serious commitment in the United States to Israel's defense, but there is a growing and, not put it this way, trivial concern at all about how and in what way Israel is conducting the conflict with result to civil Palestinian casualties, both in Gaza and now in South Lebanon. And that will, I think, continue to be a preoccupation of many Americans, and some of it with college level students has already been demonstrated as a not trivial or insignificant factor in how and in what way that part of the electorate is treating this issue. And I think with care, one can track changes in the expressions, particularly on the Democratic side, of how and in what way they are viewing this conflict and how and in what way they are seemingly becoming, if I could put it this way, a somewhat tortured analogy, more Solomonic in their judgments about the faults of both sides in terms of how and in what way this conflict should both be conducted and hopefully quickly ended.
But perhaps Donald Trump, for example, can argue, having been particularly hawkish on Iran for many years, particularly during his time in office, that this is another example where we have Iran very much in the background with this latest conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. Wouldn't that therefore be something that he could use to his advantage and show the electorate that he knows what he's talking about?
But I think that to some extent, Iran has become overblown. There was a speech yesterday by the president of Iran that I thought opened the door more carefully, perhaps, but perhaps more comfortably looking toward a workout or solution to this problem than creating a further wall of confrontation, if we could put it that way, or a further use of confrontation and force as the only significant next step. And I believe that a number of individuals in diplomatic history have said, you don't make peace with your allies, you have to talk to your enemies to do that. And that is something that I think one way or another has to be undertaken in an election year in the United States, given our traditional concern about perhaps over clinging to our enemies rather than demonizing them. That is a cultural problem in the United States, that isn't easily solved and has to be in one way or another noticed by the parties on both sides of this electoral contest.
Just go back to Israel. I mean, Israel always talks about the United States as being its staunchest ally, and the United States usually says the same thing about Israel. But it does look to the outside world as though Israel, at the moment, isn't listening to its staunchest ally. We've had Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, making no fewer than 10 visits to the region to try to broker some sort of a ceasefire, some sort of a truce and hostage release deal. That doesn't seem to have worked. Do you think there's a feeling as well in the United States that if the Biden-Harris administration isn't being listened to, that perhaps the Trump-Vance administration will be?
I find that somewhat difficult to accept, both the predicate of the question that the two sides will act in quite different ways, but it is not something that can be entirely ruled out. I don't know what that effect will be on the voting public. I think both leaders on both sides, both candidates for the president, are seriously enough concerned about it as to what I would call pull their punches in terms of discussing this issue, rather than getting more serious about it, with perhaps the Democrats having moved further in the more serious direction, the Republicans a little more hesitant about it in terms of how and in what way that may affect their electoral chances. But this electoral race changes almost from hour to hour, if not from minute to minute. And one's predictions 40 days out are predictions based on a continued closeness of the outcome in the polling data. And I think the resulting significant uncertainty that even some of the most significant experienced commentators generally end with categorizing everything that they are predicting with a note, a warning, a caveat of uncertainty.
And given your knowledge of the region, you served as US ambassador in Israel and Jordan, I believe. I'm just wondering, apart from the United States, which countries do you think can most usefully lend a hand here and try to bring about a swift resolution to what's happening in Lebanon and what's happening in the Palestinian territories?
Without making remarks about their willingness to do so, or seemingly entering into a fit of untrammeled naivete, I would say that China is not insignificant in terms of political effect in the region, partly because of its economic activity, partly because of its size and scope, and partly because it holds a veto in the United Nations Security Council. India is not insignificant. Russia has its own influence. China has shown more concern, particularly about the other war in Ukraine and the potential of that sliding toward nuclear use, which I think is very sensible and very strategic and ought to be something that is noticed and taken into account to the degree that it can be. And I would be cautious here, obviously, in indicating that my answer to your question indicates a judgment that they're just ready to do that, rather than a direct answer to your question about the significance of their weight, or were they be persuaded, and that's not ready at hand, to put that weight on the scales, if you like, of diplomacy in favor of a ceasefire and a negotiated workout of the problem.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, Middle East peace has eluded world powers for decades. And so it sounds from what you're saying as though perhaps, given the track record of the Western powers, shall we say, to bring peace to the region and to bring about a two-state solution or a solution to this long-standing problem, it might be time for some fresh faces at the table, at the negotiating table. Is that roughly what you're saying?
I would say that any successful diplomatic conclusion will benefit from a significant amount of cooperation, particularly among some of the leading powers in terms of strength. I don't believe that we should totally shut out the idea as well that a very large unanimity among all of the United Nations members, which are now beginning the opening week of the General Assembly in New York as we speak, would also be something that could not be helpful in moving the area right now seemingly frozen in conflict toward a thaw and more useful change, which you very aptly described in terms of a ceasefire and a negotiated peace settlement.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and your experiences with us. It's really interesting to get your analysis. Thomas Pickering, former US ambassador to Israel and Jordan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Well, we can get some more perspectives now from Sir William Patey, who is the chair of the Labour Middle East Council and the former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iraq and Sudan. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Sir William. We've got a rising death toll there in Lebanon, more than 550 people known to have been killed. Are we looking at the beginnings of that wider regional war that the United States and its allies have spent these last 12 months trying to prevent?
It certainly looks closer today than it did yesterday and the day before. Israel, we've all assumed that both Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon and more widely Iran and the European countries and the US did not want a wider war. It seems that Israeli calculus may have changed. And they have certainly escalated in Lebanon through the indiscriminate attacks on Hezbollah, and now attacks on Hezbollah leaders, and now on wide-scale bombing throughout Lebanon. So Israel has upped the stakes and seems less concerned about the possibility of a more intensive war with Lebanon, just as the pressure was building up for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the conflict.
Yeah, and the fact that 10 months since the last truce was brokered in Gaza, it doesn't make people probably in Lebanon very optimistic that a diplomatic solution will be found in the immediate future there.
No, they'd be right not to be optimistic, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't give up. I was asked, at the Labour conference, which side was the Labour government on. I said they were on the side of peace, and that's what the efforts of friends of the region need to do. The Americans, British and Europeans, they need to be increasing the pressure on all parties, and that includes Hezbollah, it includes Hamas, and Israel, and particularly the Israeli government, to end this conflict, to get a ceasefire, which the Labour government has been calling for some time. A ceasefire in Gaza is also a key to a ceasefire in Lebanon, and indeed to an end to Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. The whole escalating tensions and conflict can be brought to an end through a ceasefire in Gaza.
But doesn't all of this, can't it all be traced back to the absence of dialogue between Western powers and Tehran? If that dialogue was taking place on a regular basis, a lot of this might have been prevented, might it not?
Well, I'm not sure of that. These conflicts all have their individual origins. The Palestinian question was around long before we had problems with Tehran. Obviously, Iran's influence in the region has been malign. They've supported the Houthis in their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. They have armed Hezbollah. They have encouraged Hamas. So they're certainly part of the problem in the region. Dialogue with Iran is, in my view, very important. We tried it through the nuclear deal, which the Trump administration ended. I think it's important to talk to Tehran. Arab countries are doing that to try and lower the tension. The new president has indicated a willingness to engage in a dialogue. But at the same time, Tehran is sending missiles to Russia to fight to support the invasion of Ukraine. So these are what I call contradictory signals. But as a diplomat, dialogue is our bread and butter, and that's the way wars stop.
Do you see a point at which Iran might directly weigh in as opposed to using its proxies like the Houthis, like Hezbollah? Do you actually see a point at which Israel and Iran could actually face each other on the battlefield, whatever that battlefield might look like?
Well, we came close to it when Iran fired over 300 missiles towards Israel in retaliation for Israel attacks in Iran. So we've come close to it before in recent times. I think Iran will want to avoid a wider conflict. And any sensible Israeli government would want to avoid a wider conflict. But I'm not sure the current Israeli government can be described as that sensible. They have a very deliberate policy of expanding their influence in the West Bank, of trying to take over Gaza. Elements of the government want to drive the Palestinians out of the West Bank and Gaza. So we are seeing a pretty extreme Israeli government up against a movement in Lebanon, Hezbollah, who are not known for their moderation either.
And do you think, as some of our guests today have been saying, that Hezbollah has been severely degraded already, and the airstrikes have only been going on for a couple of days? But do you agree with that assessment that Hezbollah has been?
Well, collectively, the pager attacks on Hezbollah members, the attacks directly against their leadership, and now this targeting of Hezbollah sites, however indiscriminate it is, because it's pretty clear that large numbers of Lebanese civilians are suffering as well. But this is a serious Israeli assault on Hezbollah capabilities. But my experience of air attacks, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Yemen, is that air attacks alone can never completely destroy an enemy.
Indeed, and some would say you could never completely destroy Hezbollah. Would you agree with that, or do you think it's so ingrained in the Lebanese system now, and it's, there are Hezbollah members of parliament. It's a sort of a state within a state. I mean, it's going to be impossible to completely neutralize Hezbollah, isn't it?
I think so. In the same way, I think it's impossible to eliminate Hamas. You can kill a lot of its fighters, but you can't. You won't eliminate the idea. And it's the same with Hezbollah. I mean, let us remember that Hezbollah grew out of a previous Lebanese invasion of Lebanon in 1982. There was no Hezbollah before Israel invaded Lebanon in the 80s. So Hezbollah was a product of an Israeli invasion, and it's grown in strength since then, despite Israel being in Lebanon until 2000 and then invading again in 2006. The history of Israeli invasions of Lebanon are not good ones.
Yeah, and we keep hearing from Israel that their war is not with the people of Lebanon, it's with Hezbollah. But given, as we've been saying, Hezbollah is such an intricate and it's so woven into the fabric of Lebanon and its systems and its infrastructure and everything else, that makes it a rather unrealistic statement from Israel to say to the Lebanese people, we're not at war with you, we're only at war with Hezbollah. And that's a pretty hollow statement.
It's a pretty hollow statement.
It's hollow because when you look at the death toll alone, contradicts that enormously.
Indeed, and when the Israeli government says it's not at war with the Palestinian people, only with Hamas. If only Hamas would, get out. If only the civilians would get out of the way, and Israel could destroy Hamas. So it's the same. That's the same rhetoric we're seeing in Lebanon. Telling people to if you live near a Hezbollah operative, you need to move away within a kilometre. People won't know who Hezbollah operatives are. They may know some of them, but you could have someone connected with Hezbollah living in your apartment block, and you would be a target. It's an impossible thing for the Lebanese people to comprehend or to take action on. It's cynical. And it may be contrary to international law. I'm not a lawyer, but it strikes me that some of these attacks on civilian areas constitute war crimes.
And it seems contrary to Israel's own national security, because by making comments like that, you assume they're trying to isolate Hezbollah from the rest of Lebanese society and say everyone else has nothing to worry about. It's only a Hezbollah problem. And yet we're seeing on social media a flood of messages of support, banners, photographs, all the rest of it coming from all different elements of Lebanese society. And the message is one of unity in the face of a foreign aggressor. There's no mention of this being a war with just one section of our society. Would you agree, therefore, that Israel's actions are actually longer term, working against Israel's own national security?
I think so, and there are many Israelis who say that. This current Israeli government is devoid of strategy. They don't have a strategy for peace and security for Israel. They have created a monster in generations of people, Palestinians, who will hate the Israelis more than they ever did. And the same will happen to people in Lebanon. So Israeli security, there are many Israelis who are saying that the biblical, the religious extremists of the settler movement who hold sway over the Israeli government are creating insecurity for Israel. Security for Israel lies in living peace side by side with the Palestinians in a peaceful state. The Arab world sent a strong message in 2002 with the Arab Peace Initiative that they wanted to integrate Israel as a normal country in the Middle East, that it could rely on the Arab countries to support Israel's peace and security, but not at the expense of the Palestinians, and now not at the expense of the Lebanese. The long-term security for Israel lies in living at peace with its neighbors, and nearly all Arab countries, I can't think of any who haven't, are ready to do that. But Israel is creating circumstances in which Iran is able to exploit divisions, and they're able to exploit the cynicism of certain Israelis who want to take over the whole of what they call Judea and Samaria and drive the Palestinians out of their land.
And so, William, knowing the region as you do, and I'm talking about the region in which I am speaking to you from, you've been, as we said at the beginning, ambassador for the United Kingdom in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Sudan. In this region, where would you say you would invest the most hope in terms of bringing about, brokering some sort of solution to the situation in Lebanon and the situation in Gaza? Where would you say we're most likely to get some sort of a solution from? Because up until now, notably on Gaza, it's been very much the Qataris and the Egyptians who've been brokering the talks. And I don't think there's an awful lot to show for those talks, is there?
Well, I mean, as you say, I've just come from the Labour conference, and there we were talking about Britain building a much stronger relationship with the Gulf countries, the Gulf powerhouses, as we call them. And I think listening to people in the region, working with the countries in the region to devise solutions not only to the Palestine issue, but to stop the war in Lebanon, reaching a modus vivendi with Iran, bringing an end to the war in Yemen and an end to the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. These are all issues that Britain and other countries need to work with the countries of the region, with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with Qatar, with the Gulf, with the GCC, with Egypt, Jordan, all countries which have strong ties with whom the UK has strong ties. By working together for a diplomatic solution, I think that's the only way we're going to bring an end to the multiple crises that the region is suffering from.
And before a diplomatic solution, Israel might say that it needs some sorts of results. It needs to show something to the Israeli people, perhaps, to show that its mission accomplished in Lebanon. What do you think that point would be? What would look like a satisfactory conclusion there in Lebanon for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to show the Israeli people that mission accomplished, time to withdraw?
Well, a ceasefire, maybe a complete implementation of UN Resolution 1701, which made provision for withdrawal of forces from the borders. The people of Lebanon can go back and live peacefully in the south of Lebanon, and Israelis can go back and live peacefully in the north of Lebanon. That sort of peace deal. But it needs a ceasefire in Gaza as well. It needs the Israeli hostages to be returned. It needs an end to the war in Gaza. It needs to be the beginnings of discussions about what a future Palestinian state would look like. And on that basis, Arab countries have made it clear that if there was some discussions about a future Palestinian state, then they would be prepared to contribute to the reconstruction of Gaza. It needs an end to aggressive settlements in the West Bank and the sort of intimidation and killing that's going on of Palestinians in the West Bank. These are all interrelated problems that need to come together, and as part of that, the Arab world needs to reassure the Israelis that in those circumstances, Israel can rely on them to support their security and peace alongside the Palestinians. It seems a far distance to go, but without that vision and without that strategy, it's difficult to see how you can deal with each individual problem as they flare up.
And Sir William, we've heard the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, speaking about the situation. I've only got an excerpt of what he said, so I don't have the full context, but he's been urging restraint and de-escalation. I mean, urging restraint and de-escalation, obviously that's what everyone wants. Would you like to see the British government perhaps doing more to help bring about some form of a resolution to this crisis? And what might that be?
Well, you have to be realistic. I mean, the British government is one of many important countries who have friends and allies in the region and interests in the region. So it's not in their hands alone. They'll need to work with the Americans. The Americans will need to be part of any solution to reassure Israelis I mean, I think working towards de-escalation means a ceasefire. That's what the British government's position is. We want to persuade the Israelis that the time has come to stop the fighting in Gaza, to stop the fighting in Lebanon, and let's talk about a more peaceful future. That's the immediate question, and the British government's contribution will be to work with friends and allies to bring that about. Now, there are various forms of pressure you can use. The British government has implemented a partial arms embargo on Israel in relation to arms that might be used in Gaza. There are calls for a further a more widespread arms embargo. The danger with that is it reinforces the Israeli perception that the world is against them. So it's a difficult balancing act that you have, reassuring the Israelis that we support the state of Israel within 67 borders, but we're not going to support moves which are going to make a Palestinian state impossible.
And just lastly, Sir William, and sorry to put you on the spot, what are your predictions here? Do you see, before we get to the stage where a resolution is found, do you think that the Israeli operation, when it comes to Lebanon, could lead to a ground invasion? Do you think that's something we might see during the weeks ahead?
I think it's a possibility. Israel has certainly, they're on an escalatory path. I can't see that Hezbollah will respond to the current attacks by stopping their rocket attacks. If they don't stop their rocket attacks, then there's a logical pathway for this Israeli government. So I fear that an Israeli invasion at this time is more likely than not.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us here in Al Arabiya News. Sir William Patey, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, That is all we have time for today's edition of Global News Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.